Welcome, everybody. Welcome to episode 14 of Changes. This Google Plus Hangout on Air is brought to you by me, Sally Ember, Edd, and today's guest, John W. Howell, a thriller author. John, what would you like people to know about you this morning?
Well, thanks, Sally. The first thing I'd like them to know is how really pleased I am to be with you. I have been very impressed, and you won't remember this, but one day you pointed out a typo in one of my pieces that went live over the internet, and I really appreciated it. In fact, it got me a little bit more in the pay attention mode, I might add. And if we go to my website, you'll find I've already corrected that other one that you.
Excellent. I know. I'm terrible because I have a red pen in my head all the time. What else do you want people to know about you?
Yep. Okay. Well, let me see. Let me give you a little bit of my background. I went to Michigan State University as my undergrad school and Notre Dame as my grad school. So you can see on certain Saturdays of the year I'm a little bit torn, but I'll get over it someday.
Is that a football reference?
Yes, that was a football, basketball reference.
In case people aren't aware, those are rival schools in the same, what do they call it? District? No.
No.
Conference?
Notre Dame is actually independent, and Michigan State's part of the Big Ten. But the sort of hatred between the two is very real and quite obvious when you get into the conflict. So I in between undergrad and grad, I actually started a business career, and I call it I was a prisoner of organized commerce for over 40 years. Now, why did I call myself a prisoner? Well, when you have young kids and a wife and a need to make a living, you really have to do what I think is right to do, which is try to do your best and provide for your family. Took me 40 years to do that. And when my youngest, who's now 25, graduated from Baylor University, which is now my new almost favorite school, I decided, at that point in time, I've worked long enough. I think I'll lay down those tools and pick up the writing tool. So I started actually full-time in 2012, moved to an island where I could so-called be alone, and just started writing full-time.
Wow, you're one of the
first. I'm sorry, so I couldn't hear you.
You're one of the lucky ones who gets to devote your life to your writing.
I do now. I actually tried to write a book while I was working. I think I worked on it probably 10 years. Finally got it done. It was 120,000 words. One time I was taking a trip, so I decided to print it off and then do the editing, in the airport, on the airplane, that kind of thing. And I got 50 pages, I believe, into it, and I said, this really sucks. This is not good work. So I took it was a volume. It had to have been this thick. I took the printed version, and now it's right now today. It's in the laundry room, and it's used to hold the door open when the winds kind of pick up.
Now that gives a whole new meaning to authors who repurpose our writing.
Absolutely. Well, I don't know how many trees died as a result of my print off, but I decided that I would pay homage to them, at least try to get some use out of the manuscript. So
making a doorstop, that has to be a new low, pun intended.
Yes, no, it is good. But what happened during that process, I just realized that, hey, I don't know a lot about writing. I think I do, but I don't. So I took some time to go back and really, kind of study the craft itself. I was very fortunate at one point to take a class with Elmore Leonard. He was the instructor. Yeah, I know. And I was a student. And I, at the time, didn't really listen to some of his advice. His advice on dialogue tags and his advice on characters. But then after I overwrote, which first book was horribly overwritten, I decided to go back and review those notes and review that lesson. And so I started writing in 2012 in April, and it was April 1st, that we can joke about as well. And I finished in August. And so manuscript was at some 92,000 words. Then I went, and decided that I wanted to try to get somebody to publish it. So I did the usual query stuff, and finally, pretty much with agent query and with other publisher queries, finally realized I was on the wrong track. So what I did is got some research together, and Writers Marketplace has an excellent research tool, which you can go online and put in some parameters. And I put the parameter of no agent, because agents weren't responding to me. My stuff was all wrong. You know how it goes. Gee, we just have a project just like yours. Oh, well, that's good. That gives me confidence that I've written about something new. I did no agent, first-time author, and found a publishing company called Martin Sisters Publishing. I submitted to them, and then because they were okay with multiple submissions, I decided to submit to a few others. But they accepted me, and I had to tell the others that I'm already accepted. So I finished My Girl, my first novel. It was published. My second novel, called, which is kind of a word you'll love, Sally, His Revenge. And the third one, and it's with the publisher now. The third one, which I'm at 87,000 words, is the final trilogy in this series, final of the trilogy, and it's titled Our Justice. So those are the three items that I've.
We have a progression of pronouns. We go from my to his to our.
Yes, on purpose.
Right. I noticed that. Okay, so let's get into this for a minute, because you and I talked briefly offline before we came on live, and welcoming everyone who's listening and people who just arrived or who are watching on the archive on YouTube. I'm going to really drill into this. What is a thriller? How is it different from suspense? How is it different from a mystery? What does all that have to do with anything? And how did you decide to call your book a thriller, or your trilogy a thriller?
Yeah, perfect. As a new author, I had the same questions of what am I going to call this thing, right? So I had to kind of look around and define what I would think a thriller is, and maybe I can do it as simply as saying, okay, the difference to me, and I'm not an expert, of course, but the difference to me between a mystery, suspense, thriller, and horror is basically a thriller, in my mind, leads the reader through a number of circumstances that the reader can identify with, become involved with, and then almost part of the story to the end when it's resolved. I think a thriller has some of the same attributes as a mystery. In other words, a three-act play. You start with Act 1, you lay the scene. Act 2, you build in, some of the differences, and then Act 3 is the resolution. It has some of that. But it doesn't have what I would call the hidden agenda, or I think the mystery writers call it the MacGuffin, which is the little secret thing that is an aha in the parlor that is finally exposed, that brings the whole story together. Like in the Maltese Falcon, the MacGuffin was actually the Falcon.
Right.
To me, a thriller talks about things, can also give the reader an advanced notice of what's going to happen. And then the difference will be in the reader's mind. Thriller readers will say, okay, that worked, and then there's a new twist, a twist they didn't expect, even though they had all this information. That then becomes.
Okay. Okay. And so how is that different from suspense? Because those sound the same to me.
Personally, I've never looked at suspense in terms of it as a defined genre.
Okay.
So what I would say in my own idea, a thriller can be on a major stage with major players, with outrageous circumstances, with really big heroes, with really big boats, with really a lot of airplanes, a lot of action. I think some of that takes away from suspense. Suspense is a tingle in the spine. Suspense is very quiet.
Okay.
Suspense kind of sneaks up on you.
Well, I think
Thrillers,
we're talking about psychological suspense in particular, but I think I would agree with that it tends to be more interrelational or internal. And thrillers, like, we're blowing up things, and we've got lots of machine guns and car chases and crashes and really big people, like you're saying. Like, you think of a Tom Cruise movie or some of those Harrison Ford or Bruce Willis Die Hard, Air Force One kinds of things, right?
Yes. Yes.
All right, so here's my question. What kind of nightmares are you having that you have to write about revenge and greed and murder and terrorists? What is up with that? I'm really curious because personally, I don't even want to hear about that stuff, much less write it. It would make my stomach hurt. So is this cathartic for you, and once you've written it, you don't have to think about it anymore? Or is your life so milquetoast that you're like The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, and now you get to be Tom Cruise or John Gannon when you write, or Cannon, when you write these books? What's going on there?
Yeah, there might be a third option.
All right, okay. Go.
Yeah, rather than the two polar options, because neither one of them is a good choice, by the way.
Okay.
The third option actually might be, I really enjoy constructing a situation where the protagonist is one of these, suddenly nice guys and standing around, and all of a sudden stuff starts rolling over the top of them. And they
literally, have no idea. Hit in the head in your book, right?
I'm sorry. I missed that, Sally. I was talking.
Literally, he gets hit in the head in your book.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. For no reason. He's walking out of a pizza place, or now he's going to a pizza place, and gets knocked out and has no idea what's going on. No idea.
Right.
And then the interesting part about my writing is it's first person present tense. So we have to look at all of the action through the protagonist's eyes. Nothing can happen off stage. He's got to be totally involved. Now, I could have made him totally involved as a Tom Cruise character, a big old hero. I thought that would be pretty boring. So I made him totally involved as maybe myself, or, my wife thinks that John Cannon is me, that I've built in every bit of my life into John Cannon. Not necessarily true, at least in my mind. But I really totally enjoy creating a circumstance, trying to work the character into it, and then work the character out of it. And that's basically the reason I do that.
Well, that's fair enough. I understand that then. So basically you like puzzles, and you like being able to be the one in charge of architecting and solving them.
Yes.
Okay,
exactly.
I get that. You're a control freak. No, I'm just kidding. Okay.
No, you're absolutely right. Type A, a little obsessive compulsive, and yes, I need to control everything.
All right.
That's why this interview is. That's why this interview is. Yeah.
What'd you just say?
I said that's why this interview has me in a position of being totally at your mercy. Thank you.
Well, it's not an interview, so I'm going to change that format right now. It's a conversation. And one of the things we were talking about earlier was how our books and our writing might be similar. And I use the present tense and a lot of first person in my books for a very different reason. And my reason is that I write science fiction that really focuses on the aspect of the multiverse in which all time is simultaneous. So everything is in the present tense. We just don't recognize it most of the time. We, as humans, need linear time. We need to think of things as being in the past or in the future, and us being in the moment is really difficult. So to emphasize the changes that are happening in my books to all of the characters, but especially the humans, recognition of simultaneous time is a big change. So I write all my books in the present tense, no matter who's speaking or what they're speaking about, which is really hard for readers at first, and a lot of reviewers don't get it, and they think I'm grammatically impaired, which is kind of hilarious if you really know me. So what I think is important is that you have a reason for writing in the present tense in the first person. It has to do with immediacy and not having anything that your first person protagonist doesn't know appearing in the story, which is really exciting in a thriller or a mystery or suspense. I'm not doing it for that reason at all, but they are both still very interesting perspectives where you can only know what the person speaking knows.
Right.
And I think it's not limiting.
Yeah, the other part of it is, and by the way, I'm sure people have commented on how uncomfortable, at least they have to me, how uncomfortable and how different first person present is in a particular situation. But one of the other reasons is that subtly the reader is actually in the action as well. In other words, they're there.
Yes, very good. I like that a lot. And then the other part of it is we're here. And we're here with a few viewers right now. We're here with however many viewers and listeners come to this later on YouTube or in a podcast who aren't going to interact necessarily, but they're going to listen and think about it. And however many years YouTube is operating, this is going to be on forever. So this is its own present tense, right?
Right.
We'll be immortalized.
That's an excellent observation.
So we only know what we know right now. We don't know anything else. You could become really famous. One of your books or more, the whole trilogy could be made into a series of films. And you could be the next, I don't know, what do they call those people that have series of films, like Tom Clancy or people like that, right? And way back when, in 2014, you were on this little YouTube video with Sally Ember on Changes, and suddenly everybody's going to want to watch it because it was before you got your whole fame thing going on.
Well, let me ask you. I know you're a Buddhist. Let me ask you, is there somewhere I can appeal to someone within your religion to make that happen?
Well, if you're a Nirchen Buddhist, which are the people who chant in order to acquire whatever it is they're praying for, you could go. Like, that's the kind that Tina Turner is, and a lot of other famous and not so famous people. They have this idea that Buddhism and chanting and what you want can happen. That's not the kind of Buddhism I practice. But a lot of people do, and I'm not putting it down. But yeah, you could go and learn that chant and learn that practice and sit there in your altar or shrine or go around your life and chant away and see if it helps you. I don't know, it won't hurt. I mean,
movie, right? Yeah.
It's a longer chant than that. It's a mantra is what we call it. Some people mispronounce that as mantra, and I just want to slap them. It's a mantra, and it's usually in Sanskrit. Sanskrit is considered to be one of the original human languages, and each syllable is considered to have mystical potency, kind of like each letter does in the Hebrew alphabet. And so there's a whole mystical thing going on there with holograms and deeper meanings and density of understanding and how it works with your vocal cords and your central and inner subtle body and your channels and your winds. And I won't go into all that because I don't even know that much about it, but sound, as many people know, is quite powerful for many animals, not just humans.
Yeah, while we're on the subject, you and I talked earlier about challenges, and I told you I was very interested in how Buddhism, you handle challenges. What part of Buddhism helps you with when you're in a challenge situation in your life?
Well, that's a really great question. I'm so glad you asked that. There are several ways that the Buddhist philosophies and mind training can help people, but it really depends on how we utilize them. They, in and of themselves, don't do anything. They just sit there in a book, or you've heard them in a teaching, or you know that they're part of your practice, but if you don't internalize them and understand them, contemplate them, and really have them become part of you as an integrated self, then they just sit out here as possibilities. But the main things that start most Buddhists are the first one, which is what makes us a Buddhist, which is a vow not to harm, which is called taking refuge. And it has to do with the recognition of the sanctity of all life, or the recognition of the similarity among all sentient beings, that all we want is to be happy, all we want is to avoid suffering. Whether it's the smallest little microbe or the biggest whale, that's what we all have in common. And the other things that all Buddhists think about or know about and deal with are the four thoughts that turn the mind, is how it's translated into English. And the main one of those that really helps everyone is impermanence. Change. Changes are all the time happening, unavoidable, and the biggest way we suffer is that we resist. We get upset. We believe it's something, we're being persecuted. Why is this happening to me? Why does anything happen that I don't want? Why can't I keep what I want and not have what I don't want? People who ask those kinds of questions, especially if they obsess over them, are making their own misery. And so one of the first things we learn in Buddhism is that you are in charge of how you respond to every situation. You don't have to be a tumbleweed going from reaction to reaction to reaction without any sense of operational control. You can be the driver. And if you're the driver, then the first thing you're going to drive through is a recognition of this is normal. I'm not being persecuted. I'm not special either. It doesn't matter what I think. It doesn't matter how I feel. It doesn't matter what I want. I can be a good person or a bad person. None of that matters, because impermanence is the great leveler. First of all, we're all going to die. Get used to that. Nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to think about it. But it's in front of us every day. I don't know about you, but at our age, we've lost a lot of people already, right? Whether they're older than we are or they succumb to illness. I've had friends that were murdered in car accidents, suicide, all kinds of different conditions and illnesses, and that just continues. And one day, one of us or both of us will be dead. So if you aren't knowing that in your bones, you're going to have this huge amount of resistance to every other change that comes your way, and that will make you suffer.
Right. You know, that's really interesting too, because I did a short story called Cold Night Out, and it's a story of a guy who wakes up in the woods, and he doesn't understand how he got there, and in fact he falls asleep, and all this is a real dream, and it really touches on that theme of trying to cling to something that is so temporary that it's not worth really clinging to, and to be so focused on oneself. I purposely in the short story brought out. Are we echoing now, Sally?
A little bit.
Yeah, I wonder what that is. Anyway, one never knows. I brought out brand names. I used hundreds of brand names: Maserati, Petit Philippe, you know, all the things that this guy clung to, and really explored that through several short stories, and found it a fascinating idea that we can't let go, and should be able to let go. So.
Well, that brings me to another question. You have a short story here that you use the phrase mistaken values. What does that mean?
Well, there's the one use of it is basically where people put their so-called trust or their more or less their esteem into something that isn't really real. And if it isn't real, what is it? Well, to them it is real, because they take the Petit Philippe watch. People think that's really a value. It's valuable. Or take giving to the poor as a value. Some people really believe that's a good thing. other people believe, that's silly. If you give to the poor, it'll just keep them off from getting a job. You know, you've heard those kind of comments. So what I do is explore the difference in value that people really believe in versus what others believe in those values, and then hopefully try to explain what is a real value. I have one story where a young man comes to a house to meet the parents, and the whole story up front is that he's real humble, you know, and the father's ostentatious, and the father's, you know, real puffed up business person. By the way, I just love business people. Anyway, puffed up business person who puts the kid through a bit of a strain. We'll come to find out the kid is a dot-com billionaire who has humbled himself in favor of the person that he really loves, his girlfriend. And he had no reason to do that. He could have just bought the whole house, bought the family, and just, you know, said, okay, this is the way it is. He didn't do that. He came in as a suitor, and the father didn't handle it the correct way. So that's a misguided value. Father had a misguided value. The young man took the value of being a humble suitor and accepted it as a legitimate value, even though he didn't have to. That's the exploration.
Okay, so you're using the words mistaken and misguided kind of interchangeably, so I think I have a better sense of it, but I would challenge you from purely a Buddhist perspective, because nothing is real. And
Yes,
this is all an illusion. And there is no such thing as anything permanent or inherently valuable.
Yes. Well, as a Christian, then I would push back on the Buddhist value, saying, okay, there are some things that are valuable, at least to me, and that those values that I have are worth exploring in the writing, rather than just saying, well, everything is temporary and there's no use doing anything.
No. Those aren't the same thing at all. See, you went right from a recognition of impermanence to nihilism, and that's going to an extreme that Buddhists caution against all the time. Buddhists are not nihilists. We don't think there's no reason to do anything. We don't give up. We don't think that it doesn't matter at all. We think it matters extremely, and that's how we focus on recognition of the familiarity and similarity among all beings, and have that as our highest value, which is to generate compassion, which is the wish that all beings would not suffer, and to feel love, which is the wish for all beings being happy.
Yes, I think we share that same value then.
Yes, so it's not that we don't have values, it's that we don't value anything that's in the outdoor physical reality as permanent.
Yes, okay. See, well, all right, then I'm saying the same thing you are. It's the ethereal that is valuable, something you can't put your hand on, as opposed to a tree.
Okay, and we have a visitor here. I want to let him come into the conversation. Neil Brown is saying that he's enjoying our conversation, and he called it beautiful. And thank you for visiting, Neil, and thank you for your comment. Is that someone that you know, John?
No.
Okay.
Thank you, Neil. You know, I'm feeling the same thing, because I love to talk with Sally, and this is me. No,
well,
this is like a vacation here.
Well, good, because now we're going to get into some of the other things we talked about that we both were interested in, which would be your intentional use of language and how your choices have changed over time, where we talked about this phrase, attractive young woman. Would you like to dig into that a little bit?
Yes. For those who are listening and looking, Sally did make a bit of an observation, and I tend to agree with it, that when you have a dead body, why is it an attractive young woman? Why couldn't it just be a young woman? I think from a sort of an author's viewpoint, the reason I use the word attractive as opposed to young woman is that in the book itself, there's a scene where the father of the young woman and the protagonist have a meeting after she is gone, and the father is trying to find out from the protagonist how close he was, whether was there a relationship, and he doesn't do it very directly. He does it kind of, asking questions of this and that. And actually, our protagonist, John Cannon, doesn't know a lot about this person. So his initial contact with her was in buying a boat. She was a yacht broker, and he viewed her as attractive, articulate, and in fact, her character background, she was actually a professional person before she came and became a boat broker. And then using, and I told Sally this, and don't throw the brick, anybody. But originally, I had thought about saying attractive young girl, and I went, wait a minute, that doesn't even meet well with me, blurb or no blurb. So attractive young woman was blurb language, designed quite selfishly to get people to believe that there is a whole bunch of really neat stuff in this book, including a dead person who's attractive.
All right. I'm going to bring Neil in again because he's made the mistake of thinking that we're brilliant. And he says, I enjoy hearing brilliant people talk. And I would say, thank you, Neil, for your mistaken and misguided values. But
Yes,
maybe we are brilliant this very moment, who knows, compared to some people. And I also want to welcome Grayson Paris, who's watching over on YouTube. Thanks for coming in and letting us know you're there, Grayson. And I want to just respond back to what you said about changing girl to woman. I'm a lifelong feminist, like from the age of 3. And so part of what I learned over the years is that a girl has to be under the age of 17. And after that, it's a young woman or a woman. So right away, I would have been offended or just ridicule your choice of girl, since this is a full-grown adult person who happens to be female. But I am going to challenge the whole concept of attractive, because one of your other stories looks at cultural differences. And I think you know enough about culture to know that cultural constructs are what creates ideas of attractiveness. So what one person might think is attractive in a different part of the world would be unattractive to someone in a different part of the world or coming from a different background. So, for example, we don't put those rings on our necks in the female population of America to make them longer and wear them all the time, the way some places in Africa do. Or we don't make huge holes in our ears most of the time and have big discs hanging from them if you're a man. Some people do that, and they think it's attractive or symbolic of something positive. So what makes this woman attractive is completely arbitrary, and it's a matter of the time and the place and the people speaking about it that create that concept of attractiveness. So I'm going to challenge all that all the time whenever I hear it, because I think it's not very descriptive. It's kind of lazy. So what does she really look like would be my question.
Right. Of course, do not confuse a blurb with the actual story.
Oh, no, I know. I'm just giving you a hard time. I know that
you should. No, I agonized over the words. You get, for a blurb, you get 16 and a half words, or whatever the stupid stuff is. And you always agonize over each and every word. And attractive young woman, to me, actually, when you see the description in the book, you will come to the conclusion that she is someone who looks nice. Okay? Now, attractive in terms of her scent, attractive in terms of whatever is going on. We don't know enough about her. She is not, although she does appear, at least name-wise and somewhat in reference in each of the 3 books, we don't really know a lot about her, nor does the protagonist. And that then becomes the problem. That then becomes, who is this person? And when someone reads My Girl, the book, they find out that John Cannon took the view of attractive and didn't go much further with it.
Right.
But then he suddenly discovered he didn't know this person who
Great.
was murdered at his side over something that he really didn't understand at the time. By the way, in the book, she tries to warn him right in the first few words of the book. She tries to say something, and he doesn't. He can't. They're in a bar. They're in a loud bar. The karaoke is going to start, and he can't hear what she's saying. He wished he could later. He wished he knew her better later.
Right.
He wished he had been a little less stereotypical in his thinking later.
Excellent, excellent.
All that comes out.
Bring all that to a new level of recognition of superficiality as part of the story.
Yes.
Excellent.
Yes, and that's why I agonized over the word attractive.
Mm-hmm.
Because I would like people to say at the end of the story, John, you should have known her better.
Nice.
That's one thing I'd like them to say.
Yeah.
Also, let's be real. I mean, she as a character we all move on from her.
Uh-huh.
We do. I hope the reader at some point in time, at the end of the story, wonders why I didn't recap whatever happened to her. Because we have a funeral and that's the end of it. I just would hope they would do that, but they won't, because she's a passing character.
Well, I think you bring up an interesting point, which all the mystery writers who have dead bodies, or the thrillers who have dead bodies, all the writers who end up with dead bodies, one or more, have this decision to make, which I would consider to be a personal or social dilemma. How authentically do you depict each of these people prior to their being killed off, or in flashbacks, so that the people could actually care about whether or not they lived or died, or are they really expendable? Because sometimes they really are. We joke about that in Star Trek, that you watch a Star Trek episode and somebody that's in the episode that's wearing a red shirt is going to be killed off. And we call it the red shirt syndrome, because they're new on that episode and now they're going to be dead because of an explosion or an alien problem or whatever malfunction happens. And so you should know when you're watching one of these episodes, count the red shirts, they're all going to die. And
Right.
It isn't always true, but it's a funny thing. And so you can look at some stories on TV, in a film, in a book, in which murders or accidents or death occur, and you have to ask, how did they decide whether to make these people three-dimensional or not? And so I would put it to you. How did you decide how much to literally flesh her out?
Yeah, good question. My first instinct was she shall not have died in vain. Okay, that was my first instinct, because you can kill somebody off in the first paragraph and never look back, because there were so many things involved in her life. How she got to become a broker. She had parents, older parents, how they cared for her. She had a brother. The brother, I mean, we find out she has a brother. We get a dimensional view of her as someone who actually lived, walked the earth, and was done away with by a band of not very nice people.
Okay. All right.
And that's what I intended to do.
That's good. And so then Neil comes back in with this great comment saying that he thinks that's one of the nice things about writing, that we get to use our imagination. I think he means as a reader, because he says attractive will elicit one picture for me and another for others. And of course that's true. And we all have that internally all the time.
Right.
And so you might describe her very, very detailed, what her hair looks like, what her face looks like, how tall or short or fat or thin, or what she's wearing or anything. But that doesn't necessarily translate into attractive unless you label it that way and decide to make her seem that way. People might not consider it. They would just look at the facts. She's wearing a blue shirt. She's got long black hair. She's 25. She weighs 150 pounds. She's 5'9". Well, you can draw whatever conclusions you want from that. Some people would consider that attractive. Some people wouldn't, or they wouldn't think about it. But as soon as you put that word in there, now we have to consider everything in that light.
Yes, which I want the reader to do.
Great. So you had that intention and you fulfilled it. And I think that's the other thing about being a very thoughtful author, which I hope people are, is that you really consider what adjectives, what situations, what decisions we include in our writing for a particular purpose.
Right. Well, I felt, and the scene, the reason, I mean, I always, by the way, have an ending to a book before I start it. I always have the ending in mind. So it's kind of a backtrack for me. It's, you go back and say, okay, how do I fill that in? When I was thinking about the scene where a father, and I'm a father, how I would feel if my daughter was murdered. In other words, how I would want to talk to people who knew her at this particular location. Yes, I know her at home. I know her, in my environment. But how, the people who knew her here, what did they think, and what kind of relationships did she have? The young woman also left a message to the father that she asked to be delivered to the protagonist.
Wow.
And this message, because our protagonist didn't seem to come up to snuff in understanding his daughter, he actually contemplated not delivering the message. And only when the protagonist said, look, if she wanted you to deliver the message, it's your duty to deliver it. And he suddenly slumped and realized, yeah, I really should deliver the message, even though he didn't want to.
Well,
he wanted it to be.
Yeah, and grief operates differently in different people at different times, and depending on the circumstances of the loss can really change the character of our grief. We talk a lot in people who understand that. I used to work in counseling a lot about complicated grief. And complicated grief means that you're not just sad. You're not just missing the person. You're angry at them or angry at the circumstances surrounding their death, or you have a complicated relationship, which means you didn't just love them. Maybe you were really having a contentious relationship. And so all of that really adds to the burden of the grieving person, because it isn't just a simple, oh, isn't this sad, let's have a funeral and I'll miss you. There's a lot more going on.
Exactly.
And that's
exactly.
important.
I hope I capture those feelings.
Yeah,
it's a short scene.
Most people really don't understand how significant it is to have your grief be complicated. Because for one thing, it can take a much longer time to move forward. I won't say move on, but move forward in your life. You feel imprisoned sometimes by some of that complication.
Right.
You can't release that. You can't be cathartic, or you can't tell people. You feel ashamed or guilty or confused, whatever it is, about that complication.
Right. Well, as a result of that scene, John Cannon decides he's going to try to find out who killed this person, and that then becomes a motivator. Within the book, there's several things going on. I mean, these terrorists are going to blow up a symbol of America's greatness. I mean, that's one thing, and they're going to use his boat to do it. That's another. But yet, within his mind, he's very simple. He's saying, I wonder who killed this person and why. And why isn't anybody concerned about that right now? That's the way he's looking at it.
Well, that's another thing I'm going to challenge. And I challenge this from the perspective of watching hundreds of TV episodes and dozens of films, maybe hundreds of films, and reading dozens or hundreds of books in which someone is murdered. Because I've just done that in my life. Why would it make you feel better? Or why would it help you to know how or who killed someone? I don't really see that as helpful. When my friends were murdered, I didn't think that it helped me get over that or move on to know the circumstances, to know who did it. It's a horrible thing. And it doesn't bring them back. And it doesn't make it better. But I guess for some people it ameliorates the edge of their grief. Is that what you were trying to present, that would do that?
Well, John learns that for whatever reason, this person was killed in his presence. Because his first inkling, he wakes up in the hospital,
right,
understands that he was found unconscious next to her body. So for whatever reason, they're joined right there. In
Yeah.
other words,
We would call that karma in Buddhism.
thank you. He is now part of her karma, and she of his.
Forever.
Okay? Forever. And he gets, he comes in contact with FBI agents who lay out this deal that there's a cell of terrorists that they know about, and John needs to help them, the FBI that is, figure out what they want to do with his particular boat, and he's to sell his boat to them, and all this big old plot. And he's saying, isn't anybody interested in how come this person was killed?
Good.
Why aren't we focused on that?
Good.
And he gets
Bring it back
chief
to the
of police.
heart. Yeah.
Yeah. Chief of police of the town thinks he's a person of interest.
Okay,
chief,
of course.
Yeah, chief doesn't have anybody else to pin this murder on, so he's not going to let John go until he's pretty sure he's innocent.
Well, we have another visitor who wants to let us know that she's really enjoying our conversation, and this is Jerry Lennon, and she says, amazing, simply amazing and thought-provoking. Thank you both. Your initial discussion of the bridge of values of Buddhism and writing is brilliant. And she says, bravo, and I say, thank you, Jerry.
Yes, thank you, Jerry.
And recognition of that is really important because we are at, unbelievable as it may seem, John, a quarter of the hour already.
No.
Yeah, it just flew by. I told you it would. We've only gotten to a tenth of what we wanted to talk about because we can talk all day. I can see that. But this particular hangout is 60 minutes, and so we are at that point where I have to stop us, unfortunately, and switch gears. And the first gear is, how can people reach you? What do you want them to know about what's coming up in your world of writing or projects or what you have about to be published? I'm going to put your website up there so people can see it while you talk. I'm going to put the URL up there first so everybody can see it, and then you can keep going and tell us about your upcoming life.
Okay, thanks. Well, as I mentioned before, I have finished the second book of the trilogy, and in the second book, we kind of take the same characters and try. John Cannon basically has foiled a plot, which would be no secret. But in the second story, he is actually thinking that he will bring the terrorists to justice in working with several of the agents. Because John helped the agents, they consider him a very trustworthy civilian, so to speak.
Don't tell us too much because you'll spoil it.
Okay, so that's the second story. Third story is a wrap-up where we finally get total resolution of everything. Those are the three things that I've been working on. When I'm really tired of writing on a novel, and by the way, I think every author will agree at some point in time you get a little bit of weary, I do turn to short stories, and they sort of put a break in some of my thought process. So I do write short stories. I also have a blog where I write every week. And on Mondays I do a top 10 not to do list. Wednesdays a short story. And on Friday I have what is called a Janku, which is really a haiku, but the term was coined by one of my readers because some of the subject matter is a little too frivolous for haiku, I guess I would put it that way.
So it's a Janku. That's very funny. I'm showing people just a quick glance at your website right now on the screen share, which lists your short stories to date, and it has your cover of My Girl.
Right, that's my tab on published work. The other tab is the front page. There you go.
You've got your nice picture of the ocean, which you call the Gulf, where you live.
I do call the Gulf. That picture
all right, that's great.
Picture changes.
Yep. And so what I want to do now is stop the screen share and bring you to what I always bring everybody to at the end is the question for my Hangout on Air, which is called Changes. I like to give our guest a chance to pontificate, use this as a platform, and speak to this question. Given all the local, personal, regional, state, national, political, spiritual, social, environmental, and other changes you're aware of, which ones cause you to hope or fear? What would you like to speak about that makes you want to be active? How are you relating to the changes? John Howell. Go.
Okay, Sally. I would say the thing that I'm afraid of, I'll start there, is the changes that are happening around the world relative to people not understanding each other, people not understanding their basic motivations, not understanding their religious beliefs, and not taking the time to basically talk as opposed to act on various elements of change. I think the world today, because there is a gross difference between the have nations and the have not nations, that I don't think nations today are really taking what I would call a good enough approach to really trying to talk through the issues that are bothering the populace. I think there are some what I would call false, I won't call them prophets, but false purveyors of religious belief that try to incite a population into one set of actions. And I just wish, honestly, that the real legitimate leaders of those religions would actually have more power, more say-so in how these splinter groups are able to put together folks that perpetrate terror throughout the world. In my book, I explore the whole Christian Judeo tradition and Muslim, or Muslim, I should say, I'm sorry, religious kind of battle that's been going on for centuries and centuries. Not that we today in 21st century world understand those deep resentments well enough. I think if we did understand the deep resentments, we would try a little harder to not take up what I would call the sword, but more or less take up the dialogue to say, hey, first of all, and I think certain cultures do this. First of all, let me apologize for actions of people in the past. Sure, I had no responsibility, nor was I there, but let me try to apologize for that. And then let's go from that point. I've apologized. Let's hear what you have to say about the actions of your side. Do you have any regrets? Do you have anything you would like to straighten out? As opposed to simply say, for instance, ugly America, you've sinned and now you must pay for those sins in violence and blood. It bothers me deeply when our government has to, and I'll say at this point has to, because I'm not at all involved in the decision making, but has to take a bunch of airplanes off an aircraft carrier and go and try to solve an issue with bombs. I would love to say that we could have a big old phone somewhere that virtually anyone who wanted to start a ruckus could just pick up the phone and say, hey, I'm thinking of starting something. Try to talk me out of it. I know that really sounds like it's a ridiculous statement. But if we could all get there, I mean, if there was the emotion to get there, certain misunderstandings would possibly go away. I personally think it was a big mistake to go into Iraq because I don't think we understood what was going on. We thought we did. We thought we had weapons of mass destruction that we as a civilized Western country needed to save the world from. But in reality, and it doesn't matter to me whether the intel was bad or good, or who's to blame or who's not to blame. In reality, seemingly our only outlet, or our only alternative, was to go ahead and bring a bunch of aircraft carriers, or one at least, up and launch attacks. There has to be a better way. To me, there has to be a better way to control the current situation.
Yeah. Well, we have one of our listeners is agreeing with you right now, Corey Miller, who has her own show, The Back Porch Writer. Thank you, Corey, for visiting. And she says, interesting conversation. I enjoy listening to John's take on things. Religion is a big topic with one of my kids right now. She quotes, if people believe in religion and religion is about peace, then why are they fighting? And she says that's from her 10-year-old.
Yeah, I have to agree with that totally. However, I also come back to human nature, and I come back to the old idea. Remember when we were kids, it was always who was right and who was wrong. Even when two kids started fighting, the teacher grabbed both. Somebody always said he started it. It's always he started it. And I think that's the way world politics is today. Well, we're justified for doing what we did because he started it. He was a demagogue. He started it. I go back to World War II. And in those days, people tended to be a little less reluctant, they were more reluctant, to go ahead and start launching attacks until somebody started something.
Right, but the definition of started something has really evolved in terms of who's in charge and what they want and what their secret agendas are. And if we had another 3 hours, we could really go into that. But unfortunately, we only have another 3 minutes. And so I have to bring your wonderful platform time to a close, even though I know you aren't finished, and I apologize, because we are at the end of our hour very soon, and we have to say our thank yous and goodbyes. So I want to thank the people who are viewing now and the people who will view in the future. Corey Miller, Neil Brown, Jerry Lennon, and some other people whose names didn't pop up, and Gracie Paris over on YouTube. Thank you all for being here and giving us your 2 cents worth and your time. I really appreciate all of you in the future. Please leave your comments and questions on YouTube, or go visit John at johnwhowell.com. That's HOWELL. Or come visit me at sallyember.com, SALLYEMBER.com. Both of us are writers. I write mostly science fiction, and I write with my blog on a lot of different topics. And I have this show, Changes, that's on almost every Wednesday, 10 a.m. Eastern Time. And next week, on December 10th, I'm going to welcome Kristen Lindsay Hager, a young adult author. So that's going to be a very big change from today. And I want to appreciate you, John, for being here, and show one last comment from Jerry. He says, kids are going to turn it around if we get off our egocentric ideas that any of us know it all. We don't. Keeping score, hanging in the past is what perpetuates the global nonsense. And she says to you, John, you've addressed a nervous item. Radical forgiveness from both sides. It takes courage, and it is what must be done. I'm not sure she meant nervous. It looks like an autocorrect problem. But I think it's important, is what she's saying, radical forgiveness. And thank you, Jerry, for that comment. And before we close, John, do you want to say any final goodbyes and thank yous?
No, I certainly want to thank you, Sally, and for having me. I appreciated this dialogue. And very nice. I do appreciate it. Also want to thank everyone who joined. And Jerry, I love the idea of nervous. But that to me is a nervous situation.
And I just want to remind everybody, if you're new to the show, that all of the previous episodes can be found on my YouTube channel, which is Sally Sue Ember, because that's how Google knows me. And it's in the Changes section of my YouTube channel, where you can find separate URLs and descriptions of every episode, previous and upcoming, on my website, sallyember.com. So thank you again, John, for being here. You were a fabulous and articulate guest, And I want to put out how high the bar is now for my future guests because John did such amazing promotion. And he even got his friends to do it. And he even got some of his friends to do it with their friends. So you get lots of points for that. And also, even though we didn't get to use some of them, you came very prepared with amazing questions and thoughtful ideas for us to converse about, because I want to remind people this is not an interview. This is a live conversation between two authors, and I really appreciate what you brought to this conversation, John.
Thank you, Sally.
So I'm going to say goodbye to everybody, and as I always do at the end, I say, go well with your changes. See you next week.